All right, starting with our top story on World DNA this morning, the hefty new US tariffs against India are set to kick in just a few hours from now.
India is going to face a total of 50% tariffs on its imports in United States. The US Department of Homeland Security has already notified India on the matter, signaling that the White House plans to push ahead with higher tariffs.
The Donald Trump-led US administration has termed India's continued purchase of Russian oil a national security concern. In an interview, Vice President J.D. Vance stated that Trump applied aggressive economic leverage, including secondary tariffs on India, to make it harder for the Russians to get rich from their oil economy.
As Trump's tariffs loom, the Indian Prime Minister has delivered a clear message to the countrymen: make in India and spend in India. Prime Minister Modi has pushed for the local vision, declaring that India would step up its strength no matter how much the pressure.
आत्मनिर्भर भारत के अभियान को हम सब आगे बढ़ाएं, वोकल फॉर लोकल बने, स्वदेशी ये हमारा जीवन मंत्र बनना चाहिए दोस्तों.
Now, the 50% figure singles out India more severely than other major trading partners. The new tariff is expected to impact India's $87 billion worth of goods exports to the US in 2024. Key affected sectors include garments, gems and jewelry, and petrochemicals. The US runs a $45.7 billion trade deficit with India. Trump has been pressing for greater access to India's agricultural and dairy markets. Indian negotiators have resisted that demand, citing risks of millions of farmers. On the other hand, US exports to India may now face retaliatory measures. India exports manufactured goods and energy like LNG and crude oil worth $42 billion.
The White House has also confirmed that all April 2nd exemptions remain intact, apart from smartphones, computers and electronic devices. Indian pharma, metals and auto sectors get relief even as broader tariffs take effect. These carve-outs are crucial for India because they represent some of the highest value and most strategic export sectors. And that's a relief for India, especially given its high trade surplus with the US and recent friction over tariffs. India's 25% tariff will now apply to a wide range of exports not covered by exemptions. And that includes textiles, electronics, machinery, chemicals and other mass market goods. New Delhi is speeding up policy changes such as overhaul and simplification of the Goods and Services Tax (GST), and this is to shore up confidence and growth in the economy. The government aims to reduce compliance costs for firms, abolish redundant laws and even simplify tax routes.
The government is also considering financial support for exporters to soften the blow from the tariffs. Textiles, jewelry and footwear are among the industries expected to be hardest hit. All right, for more on this, we're now being joined live by Professor Andrew Latham. He is a distinguished scholar of international relations, strategic studies and political economy. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA, sir.
My pleasure.
Let's get right into it. Of course, we are just hours away from when the tariffs will be in effect. That being said, we are seeing a tumultuous phase of the India-US relationship. What is your assessment of the tariffs that have been imposed and the relationship between the two nations?
I think in the long run, the relationship is going to be solid. Personalities notwithstanding and emotions notwithstanding, the two countries simply have aligned interests. And that is their economic interests, but also geopolitical interests vis-a-vis China. The tariffs, though, are in the short to medium term a source of great turbulence in this and great friction in this relationship. And they're being imposed for two reasons, one of which is to pressure Russia. That's 25% of the tariffs are about pressuring Russia by trying to cut off its oil revenues by getting India to stop buying oil. But the other 25%, which was initially imposed, is really about getting India to open up its internal market. And that is a fool's errand because pressure from the outside is not going to get Prime Minister Modi to reform an internal market in ways that are going to harm key constituencies within India. Now, having said that, Prime Minister Modi has undertaken now a reform program in terms of India's domestic economy, akin to the reforms that were instituted in the early 1990s, reform of the GST, for example, but also other reforms. There are certain constituencies, agrarian, for example, that I think Prime Minister Modi is not going to touch. So Donald Trump and the U.S. government are up to two things. On the one hand, geopolitics, trying to pressure India to stop buying Russian oil and thereby pressuring Russia to end the war, but also economics, simply trying to open up the Indian market to American exports. And that latter goal is tied to a broader goal, which is remaking the international trading order in a way that we haven't seen really since 1945.
Professor, the fact still remains that there is no deal, and Trump has always considered, his fashioned himself as a deal maker, but there is no deal right now that we see happening. Trump has said, and as you also mentioned, that they are trying to get India to stop buying Russian oil so that Russia can stop having funds for its war. But India has also mentioned that US continues to deal with Russia. It's something even the Russian president mentioned at the Alaska summit, that their trade dealings have gone up by 20% since Trump 2.0 came into power. At this point, how do you see a deal coming to the fore? Because really there's no headway on that as of now.
There isn't at the moment. I mean, Trump has been emboldened because the Japanese, when faced with his threats, rolled over. The South Koreans rolled over. The Europeans rolled over. Prime Minister Modi is not going to roll over for two reasons, one of which is pure nationalism. There's no way in which India is going to be pushed around and bullied. But the second one has to do with his internal domestic constituencies. He can't alienate certain groups and expect to win, his party to win local and national elections going forward. So that's a large part of what's going on now. I think a deal can be done once bridges have not been burned. They've been damaged, but they haven't been burned. And so I think there's scope for repairing those bridges in the future. But we need, both sides right now need to calm the nationalist rhetoric. That's true in India. It's very true in the United States. And then interests will reassert themselves. Prime Minister Modi right now is making nice with President Xi Jinping in China, trying to smooth some of those roiled waters that go back to Galwan and whatnot, but actually go back a lot longer than that. But that is not going to erase the underlying conflict of interest between India and China. And I think those underlying clashes and conflicts are going to push India and the United States back into each other's arms in a way that has been happening for the past 25 years. So when I look at the big picture, I see this tariff incident as a blip in a long-term trajectory in which the United States and India are going stronger. Remember, they overcame all of the friction when India went nuclear back in the 1990s. The United States did all kinds of things, all kinds of punishments, all kinds of pressures, but eventually they got over it. Washington got over it, and the relationship between Delhi and Washington got closer and closer and closer. I see this moment as akin to that moment, and not marking a profound rupture in Indian-American relations.
Right. Let's also talk about the end goal here. The objective, I believe, and it has been reiterated multiple times as well, is to pressure Russia. That being said, we've also heard comments from Russia and senior officials there that Russia is pretty much used to, at this point, working under sanctions, debilitating sanctions. They have an economy that is used to that sort of an environment. That being said, how effective do you think this pressure tactic is going to be? Is this a pressure tactic at all?
Well, I think as part of a broader sort of initiative, the United States could ramp up economic pressure on Russia quite substantially. Now, the question is, can Russia survive that? It has so far. It's found all sorts of ways to circumvent American pressure, American tariffs and other sanctions. It's grown closer to China, which is clearly not in the United States' best interests. So the question is, can they continue? If there's another round of sanctions, can they circumvent those? Can Moscow circumvent those as well? Or, and I hear some people making this argument, the Russian economy is on the brink of collapse. President Putin knows this, which is why he went to Alaska and then Washington, making all kinds of friendly noises. He wants a deal. And I think it's impossible to know because none of us are inside President Putin's head. On any given day, I can be convinced that he's ready to do a deal. And on the very next day, I can be convinced that he's just employing delaying tactics so that he can win the war on the battlefield.
Well, we hear your point. That was Professor Andrew Latham joining us from Minnesota. Thanks so much for sharing all your insights, some key points that you've noted here and the way forward as well. Let's see how this one pans out. Hours out from now, these 50% tariffs are going to be in place. Thanks so much for joining us, sir.
You're welcome.